Baby Cries, written and narrated by Alyanna Poe. Today's short story is sponsored by author Fallon Rains. Check out Dangerous Beginnings, a short psychological thriller on Amazon. How many chances do you give someone you love? Find out Liza McAllister's fate in Dangerous Beginnings by Fallon Rains. The link to Dangerous Beginnings is in the description. Now on to the story. I remember I ran down the stairs in the dark, hoping to get to the back door to tell my dog to shut up before someone called the police. I yanked open the door and stepped out onto the patio. He barked at the back fence, the one that butted up to Poppy Street. The gate to the street that I kept pinned and locked was still shut, but Teddy wouldn't stop barking. I poked his butt, his hackles poking me back. He flinched, whimpering and scooting away from me. Teddy whipped his head around, staring at me with wide eyes, so wide that the whites of his eyes shone. Head down, he ran into his kennel. I looked back at the gate. No sign of movement, but then I heard it. A baby crying. I could hear its wail through the silent, cold night, like a knife piercing through flesh. Living in an industrial district, I had to wonder why a baby would be in any of the abandoned warehouses around my house. Technically, my house is an old warehouse as well, but I just live in the loft of my shop. I ran back inside, snatched up a coat and my keys from the workbench, and prepared myself to go outside. The lock wouldn't budge at first, no matter how many times I spun the key around in it. The cool metal bit into my warm fingers, and for a split second, I wondered if I should just go back inside. That's when the lock clicked open. I quickly closed the gate, fearful Teddy would bolt out behind me. I stuffed the lock in my pocket as I latched it. It wouldn't be locked until I got home. One street lamp on the corner of Poppy Street illuminated half of the block. I was in the dark half when the baby wailed again. It shocked me, sending shivers down my spine, but at least I knew the direction it was coming from. I started to jog down the street the way I thought would lead me to the baby. I could imagine it sitting in a cardboard box or dumpster, abandoned by its uncaring parents. Shit. As I passed dark buildings made of cold steel and concrete, I could envision myself stumbling upon an OD'd mother with her crying child in her hands. I've never had kids, but I've always wanted one. If I did find an abandoned child, I knew I wouldn't be able to keep it. I would have to give it to the police and forget it even existed. I wouldn't be able to keep it. No kids for me. I had paused to catch my breath when I heard it again. It was in the building to my right. I knew it. I could hear the wails bouncing off the walls inside. I slowly approached, trying to get a peek into the dark windows with no success. Walking up the driveway, I could see that the front door was barely cracked. A sliver of darkness peered at me. Calming my breath, I pushed on the door. Large windows let in faint yellow light from the nearby street lamps. In the middle of the empty warehouse sat a crib. The cries were louder, rocking my tired brain. I felt as if I was still half asleep, dreamily walking through the warehouse, getting closer to the crib. Despite walking softly, my footsteps echoed in the large room. A child, all alone in a big, dark warehouse. If no one would have heard its cries, it was set in stone that it would have died of hypothermia. I could see my breath as I approached. I should have brought along a bigger jacket or something I could wrap the child in. I would hold it close until the police arrived. Hold it so close. The crib was close. I couldn't seem to speed up. I was anxious to get to the baby, but my legs were tired. I hadn't brought a phone with me, so I would have to walk all the way home with the baby and then call the police. Or not? My hands reached the edge of the crib first and pulled me closer. I peered into the faint blue crib and it was empty. The wailing seemed to emanate from the walls as my heart dropped. Where was the child? No child for me? Would I have to tear apart the walls to get to the baby? Something behind me moved, and I spun around, expecting a baby to crawl across the floor to me. A shelf against the far wall rattled, and a paint can fell to the unforgiving concrete and exploded. The crying came from the shelf, so I moved away from the empty crib and towards the crying. Something moved in the shadows beside the shelf as the cries grew louder. A man presented himself from behind the shelf, a man with a deeply wrinkled face. They weren't wrinkles of age, rather, thinking back on it. I believe they were the wrinkles one full of evil gets, one who can't help but to scowl at every living thing and smiles with a depravity only the devil himself could contain. The light from the windows behind me gave his eyes a wicked life of their own, much like seeing a hound at night. He opened his mouth and his throat moved. The crying came from his lips. I didn't know what to think other than that he was between me and the door. He slowly approached, his feet not seeming to move. Gliding through the shadows, he wailed a baby's cry, making me feel foolish for ever thinking a baby would need me. Making me feel foolish for thinking that anyone would ever claim me as their hero. I bolted for the door despite the man getting ever closer. I seemed to have made it through the doorway within 2 strides. The crying was far behind me. The door slammed shut as I raced down the driveway. I ran into the street without noticing the headlights fast approaching. You swerved, luckily, and picked me up. Do you have any kids? Any photos of your kids? Maybe when they were babies? I've always wanted a baby. Thank you for listening. Be sure to come back soon. I'll have more stories and interviews with horror authors shortly. Until then, buy my books. Eaten, Void, Cradles the Brain, Rejects, Adam's Murder, and MUKBANG are all available on Amazon and my website, authoralyannapoe.com/shop. And don't forget to check out Fallon Rain's Dangerous Beginnings on Amazon.